Welcome to the Total Boss Podcast, and I'm your host, Cristiano Green, a podcast where we talk about finding fulfillment through self-development, being a leader of your own life, and getting the most out of it as well. Tenacity, originality, talent, authenticity, and being legendary. It's all about living your best life. Hello, all you total bosses out there. I'm super excited to have you guys here on the Total Boss Podcast. My name is Cristiano Green, and I am a life and business coach for gay men and women. And I'm super excited to have on the podcast today one of my good friends, Danny Nercessian, who we've known each other for, I think, about 13 years. Now, Danny is an actor, a writer. He is a tarot reader, a light worker, and he also is doing an amazing bodywork course. So excited to have you on here, Danny.
Thanks for having me, Cristiano.
Nice. So would you like to tell anyone else a little bit more about who you are and maybe how we met?
Yeah, cool. Well, we met, about, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
We met on the Sydney party scene. Just two little twinks doing our thing back then.
We were twinks back there, weren't we?
yeah, totally shimmying our way through life. I'm currently in lockdown in Sydney at the moment, which is definitely having its challenges, but ordinarily, I work full-time. I work in the events industry, and my side hustle is I have a little tarot business, and I'm currently learning how to become a medicine wheel body worker. So that's fusing the medicine wheel modality in with massage and energetic healing. It's kind of on hold at the moment due to lockdown, but hopefully we can pick that back up maybe at the end of this year. I'm not sure. We're about halfway through the course.
Yeah, I know lockdown affects these things sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of up in the air at the moment. But yeah, that's me at the moment.
Awesome. Well, I know that I asked you to get on here today because we obviously met on the party scene, and we've both had our different journeys when it comes to dealing with addiction. So we're going to have a topic about that today, especially how now we've kind of come out the other side and are doing stuff that's actually now giving back to people. So did you want to share a little bit about your journey when it comes to addiction?
Yeah, I do. I started off... I grew up on Sydney's northern beaches in the 90s, and back then it wasn't as open as what it is now. It was quite a closed-minded community when it came to people outside of the norm or whatever they considered to be normal back then. And, I think that's just maybe where the world was at that point. It wasn't just the northern beaches. It was just how things were. So growing up, a feminine boy, like a lot of us in our community, was quite difficult. I never felt that I belonged. I felt really like a bit of an alien, to be honest. So when I turned 18 and I started exploring what else is out there, like Oxford Street,
the place to be.
And drinking became, I don't know, like they really served me. Yeah, it served me back then. It sort of, I'd go out and I'd take some pills and drink a heap, and I would feel like I sort of finally belonged somewhere. So I think, like, looking back at that time, I felt like it helped me in a way. I know that sounds crazy, but it helped me sort of let loose and be comfortable with my sexuality and become comfortable with connecting with other men. And so, but obviously, I had come from quite a traumatic childhood.
Mm.
And I believe that that was sitting dormant in me. And so when it came to using, it just escalated. And, you know, I would be the last one at the party, or wanting to keep going. And this was with party drugs at this point. I sort of partied my way through my 20s, and then in my early 30s, I was introduced to crystal meth.
Mm.
I kind of dabbled with it here and there, and it never really did anything for me until I met the needle, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that changed everything. So already being addicted to escapism, now I'd found this new way of using that was completely linked to sex, fantasy, and again, escapism. And it wasn't long before I was completely hooked. And I think it took me about 8 months before I was in rehab. I was writing it, and I was in it, and I was directing it and producing it. So I was wearing a lot of different hats. At the same time, I was discovering this new way of using. So it was completely a disaster. And we had done the show for Sydney Fringe, and then the venue asked us if we wanted to come back the following month. And I was like, absolutely, yes, yes, yes.
Amazing.
So we went back the following month, and I'd used 2 days before we were meant to be performing, or we were performing, and I used, and I hadn't eaten, I hadn't slept, and I got on stage and I was in a complete psychosis, and it was a total nightmare because it was in front of, you know, our peers, and, you know, it was just really humiliating because I was clearly not okay.
Yeah.
I think I weighed like 55 kilos, and, you know, I was really struggling anyway. So we did the show, and everyone sort of came up to me at the end of the show, and they were like, are you okay? Like, you don't look okay. And I wasn't okay. So I investigated with my auntie and my mum. I investigated some rehabs, and I was like, I've got to go. This is either, if I don't go now, this is going to kill me. Like, I just felt that way.
Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, I was in a rehab in Melbourne. I went to an all-men's rehab, which was really scary, actually, because I didn't realize how much fear I had when it came to other men. I still had this fear.
Yeah.
And so I went to this all-men's rehab, and it was incredible. I strongly recommend rehab for everyone. It was incredible. It was very challenging and very hard, but I needed this deep excavation. I needed to look at a lot of stuff. And yeah, that's kind of, and look, don't get me wrong, I was in rehab for 6 months, did a lot of really, really incredible work in rehab. And then the day I got out, I relapsed. Literally the day I got out.
Wow.
And it had been, I think, like they say, like, you know, I'd done the 12-step program, and they had said that, you know, it can be quite common for people to relapse once coming out of rehab. You sort of get all your freedom back and you kind of panic, and which is basically what I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a really interesting journey of making a lot of bad choices again, a lot of relapses for me, but also a lot of triumphs in terms of getting stronger, and understanding my triggers, and understanding why I use, and understanding why I use the way I did, particularly when it came to sex, because crystal meth and sex have this sort of like a sub community, lots of and it can get quite messy when you're someone like me who can be a little bit of a pig, and who just, let's do it for days, and, you know, and get quite lost in the fantasy of it. So, that was kind of the thick of it. But the past few years, and I will say this, like going to rehab and even my using was a really deeply spiritual experience for me, both light and shade.
Yeah.
Really spiritual. I didn't realize how much I loved my connection to spirit or my guides or to God, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Until I went into rehab and went, shit, like I value this more than I'd allowed myself to think. So coming out the other end of rehab, I sort of, I really made that a priority where I even with the dark stuff and with the relapses, I always have tried to look at it from a spiritual perspective, and that's really, really helped me. And I guess it's kind of helped me get to where I am today in terms of being able to give back and help people through that rather than a psychological point of view or, so yeah, that's sort of my story so far.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that there. I know it's a long journey, and I totally can relate to you where you, at the beginning, where you said, like, it started with just drinking and some party drugs, and you found a way to express yourself, to kind of connect to your, gay side or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But that's how it usually starts with people. You've come from a place. I grew up in a similar place, on the Central Coast, so probably very similar to the Northern Beaches, where it just wasn't right, wasn't accepted. You felt unsafe. You were bullied. And again, I was a young feminine boy, just like yourself, so I can totally relate to that. And coming down to Sydney, I had zero friends. I would come down, and it started with drinking for me. And then, you meet people who are your friends, and they're doing this and they're having a great time. You're like, oh, right, I'll just try one pill. And then it turns into, oh, okay, well, I might do that every time I go out. And then you jump onto the G train, and then you jump onto having a bump of Coke or a bump of K. And it just goes down the spiral to the point where sometimes you realize you're so far in it before you realize it's a problem, because it becomes a normal part of your life, especially if you, like us, probably, you're going out like 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week, right? Because you are feeling like you can be yourself there. When you go back to your normal life, you're like, I'm not feeling like I'm this person here. So it's difficult, because we want to be there because we're actually feeling like we get to be ourselves for the first time in our life,
Totally. And it's really safe too. Like, for the first time when I first started going out on the scene, I felt really safe. I didn't feel like, when I'd go out, like, when I was like 18 in Manly, I always had my, I don't know, it was hypervigilant. I was like, oh, is someone going to hit me? Is someone going to say something? Oh my God, like I just never felt safe. And then coming here, and the drugs and alcohol, it came with in a package deal. You know what I mean? It was available, it was easy to get, and it was fun.
It was fun. It really was.
Yeah.
And it's fun until it becomes not so much fun, when you you've been doing things for 2 or 3 days straight, and at that point, in the moment, you think it becomes normal. You're like, this is what we do, and you think it's part of the life, because that's the only thing that you've seen of being gay, and again, you feel safe, so you want to continue to feel safe and enjoy yourself, because again, when you're hiding in the closet or repressed or afraid, like you were in different areas, you want to be around that more. So it did come with the territory, but it can become, a slippery slope, and you don't really realize, because if all of your friends are doing this and getting high or getting wasted, getting drunk, whatever it is,
it becomes normal.
And you normalize it. And so everyone else around you who may be like, girl, you okay? And you're like, I'm fine. I'm fucking living my best life,
Yeah, totally. Until Tuesday hits, and then you don't feel so pretty,
Exactly right. And then you go and have a drink after work with some friends, girl.
Yeah, totally.
So then for you, because I know that you've moved around a lot, and obviously, for different reasons. What was that first time when you moved to Melbourne like, and did that affect you, or were you already deep into it before you left Sydney?
To go to rehab?
Because you went to Melbourne not to go to rehab the first time? Didn't you move there?
Oh yes, yeah. I lived in Melbourne in my 20s. Yeah, that's a good question, because I guess it was sort of it ties into that escaping, that feeling of needing to escape, and I guess because I did move around a lot in my 20s. Like I lived on the Gold Coast for a bit, and then I lived in Melbourne for a bit, and it always, I guess, the underlying the sponsoring factor was I need to belong. I need to belong. I think looking back, there was an addiction to starting over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And slipping into that I don't belong default position quite quickly. So then I would then convince myself, oh, well, I've got to change everything. I've got to move. Don't get me wrong. Those moves really serve their purpose. But it was funny because it was like I was escaping using, actually, because even in my early 20s, the party days were pretty full on.
Oh, yeah.
So I would be like, right, I've got to clean myself up. Right, I'll go to Melbourne, move to Melbourne. I'd be okay for maybe 3 months, and then I'd slip back into the same behaviours. So it was really like I was living in a circle, really. And then it gets to the point, where you can't hold down. Well, I couldn't hold down a job. My friendships were becoming fractured. I was becoming quite dishonest. As before I even started using crystal meth, my behaviour and my relationship with party drugs really promoted dishonesty in me. Like I would do anything to get hot. Like I'd just be, you lie, you cheat, you steal, you do all the things.
And it's not the real truth. It's just like the part of you that's craving that thing, right? And it does take over your
obsession. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I realized over time that I think obsession is the most painful part of addiction. It's so unreasonable, and you really feel possessed. It's just like, take me to your leader. I need to get that. I need to have that in my system right now, and I'll stop at nothing to get it. I think moving away from obsession has been a really I don't know, that feels like freedom. That really does feel like freedom.
100%. And I can understand all the things, I've lost jobs because of being out too much and calling in sick too many times. And I've had fights and, lost different friends because of, how you acted when you were, so wasted that you can't even remember, but they tell you did this. Like, that's not me, I wouldn't do that. And you make all these excuses for why they're in the wrong, because you're becoming, you're in a victim mentality, but you don't think that you are. You think that you're right because, I'm just having fun, girl. Don't kill my vibe,
Don't burst my bubble. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And you're right. The victim mentality really couples up well with addiction. For me personally, I sort of had, like I mentioned before, I'd come from a really abusive childhood, and I until I addressed that stuff, I did carry that with me as my perception of any situation was, oh my God, I'm being victimized, and I need to protect myself, or I need to figure out how to not feel this way. Cool, I'll pop a pill.
Exactly. It comes to that avoidance as well. It's so easy to avoid that by having a drink, having a pill, or whatever it is that, you're doing on that specific moment, right? Because, it can easily start with just having a drink, and then you have a bottle, and then someone's like, oh, I've got this and got that, and it's Tuesday night, and you realize it's 5 a.m. and you just can't go to work,
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So when was it that you realized that it was getting too far, or did someone else have to step in?
I stepped in, actually.
Yeah.
It was really funny because I'd sort of had this awareness the whole time that I had a problem. Yeah. Even with party stuff, before the crystal meth and the needles and stuff. I knew that, and it was something that I knew. I was like, I've got to get a hold on this. Like I've I know that I'm out of control with drugs, but I didn't know how to stop. And I do have gratitude to the heavy using, because it took me to go to that to love myself, as cheesy as that sounds, to really want to, or to be ready to face myself. After doing like a performance in complete psychosis, not only was it humiliating, and I love performing, and I would never even touch a drop of alcohol before going on stage. Like I really, really enjoyed it, and I got a natural high off it.
Bring your body as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And for me to use like that and then to perform, I was like, that's crossing a line for me, and so I kind of fronted up, and I spoke to my family, and I just said, this is what's been going on like the last, 6-7 months, and I'm a bit scared and I need to go do this. And it was kind of a relief. Like I felt this massive feeling of relief that it was finally going to be addressed, and in a safe place. And I went to Melbourne because I just needed to get out of Sydney at that stage.
Yeah.
Go somewhere and no one will know me. It was all the way down in Geelong. So I'm sure I didn't know anyone down there. And yeah, just actually finally address the pain that was sitting in me for so long. Yeah.
Amazing there to hear that you stepped in, and like, it is funny when we have some of these things that like I've stepped over the line, and for you it was I'm doing the psychosis on stage, but like all the other things it was like that's totally fine, or like
I know,
but it's
totally
important for people to realize that there is sometimes that moment that you go, fuck, enough is enough. I can't, like, I fucked up all these things, but this one is the thing that I just can't, I don't want to ruin any more of what I've done,
Yeah, exactly. And I had a lot of, like I was really proud of the show that I'd written, and I was really like, I was like sort of the leader of that troupe, and I was like the director, and I had responsibilities, and to walk in there in front of my cast looking like shaking and jaw going back and forth, and 55 kilos, like it was really humiliating. It was really, really bad. And these were in front of people that I really respected too, and yeah, it's funny because just looking back on it, like all of the dishonesty that comes with using and all of the shame and the guilt had actually become part of me. So I kind of was really comfortable in those spaces, which I now realize that that's not actually part of me. That was just part of the gig, part of the gig of addiction. But yeah, it's been really, really nice to move away from that stuff. Yeah.
Nice. So you said that you went for the first time to rehab for 6 months, yeah?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how that was, because I know that it would have been super difficult, as you said, but how was that 6 months for you? Like ups, downs, highs, lows?
It was crazy. Like I remember the first day, I had no idea what to expect.
Yeah.
And they sort of walk you in, and they go through all of your bags for contraband and all that sort of stuff. They you sign here, they explain this and that, and then they give you Valium straight off the bat, because they're like, the first week you're going to be overwhelmed, and also it's a way to help detox.
Of course.
So the first week you're on Valium, and I remember you get given a buddy. So my buddy came in, and he was really cool. His name was Faz, and he came in. He's like, "Oh, hi, welcome." And so I have my Valium. He's like, "Oh, I'll go around and introduce you to all the boys." And I'm thinking, shit, I'm actually here doing this. What the fuck? Holy shit. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And, we're walking through this is the kitchen and this is the room and and I'm meeting all of these guys, and the Valium's kicking in, so I'm not really scared because I'm sort of like, oh yeah, hey, like it's all good.
Yeah.
And I think I honestly was like, I think I needed that because I think I probably would have turned around and walked out. But those boys, like we had a brotherhood and it was incredible because you're in this space where you are sharing your deepest, darkest, most painful memories and feelings, and you laugh together and you cry together and you heal together. And it was incredible. So being in there with those guys, made it fun. And you know what? We all had a really good sense of humor towards our shit as well, which is something that I learned to do in rehab, to not, I don't know if this is like, to not take it so seriously. Like, of course you do take it seriously, but you like to be able to laugh at stuff is really important. But yeah, it was really hard though. Like it was really, really hard, really challenging, because you're uncovering your stuff, but you're also with a bunch of people who are uncovering their stuff, and everyone's responding and reacting in different ways. And we were in there with guys who were coming off heroin, and that was really, really a painful experience for them. That coming off it period. And so you're sort of supporting each other, but everyone's kind of at different places as well. So it's a really, when the relationships are good, it's a really magical community. But on the flip side, it can be really, really challenging and really difficult as well.
Yeah, because people are going through it, and people take shit out on the people around them because
exactly, yeah.
And of course, I could imagine it would be, you'd have some fucking real challenges in there, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And it's funny because, through the therapeutic community, we're learning a new language of how to communicate as well. So it's funny because the arguments can start really feisty and really ego driven. But then like as time goes on, then it becomes this like, when you did this, I felt, that whole like language, it's like a completely different way of communicating than like fighting. So that was kind of a cool progress or process to watch as we all kind of developed better communication skills, Yeah, those boys were incredible. They really, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you said, sorry, because you mentioned before that you said, if I didn't have the Valium, would have walked out. Could you have left at any time, or did you you could leave at any time?
You could, yeah. Yeah. The support workers were always like, there's the door. If you want to go, there's the door. Or if you want to stay and do it, I was determined to stay. Like I was really determined to stay because I think by the time I'd gotten to that point, I was actually really scared and I didn't recognize myself. Not even that. I didn't even know who I was, to be honest. I went there and went, holy shit, I do not know who I am. And all of these like values that I thought I had, and these certainties about who I am were actually bullshit, and were actually completely egotistical.
Yeah.
And stemming from pain. Again, I've said that a lot in this, but like there was lots of pain to sift through. So it was,
It's kind of like you go in there and you realize that throughout your life you put on all these masks and all these masks, and each one you take off is another layer of pain that you had to process, and you realize at the core of it, like you said, all these things that you build up because you found yourself on Oxford Street.
Yeah, totally.
You found a part of you, but that wasn't the real authentic you because there was all this stuff that you hadn't really been able to process, and like you said, finding yourself through substance isn't really always the heart of you, right?
That's right. Yeah. Like I look back and I think like what Oxford Street in that time gave me was confidence, to be really comfortable with my sexuality, to enjoy the silliness and to enjoy the color and the glitter and the, And that really does serve have its place. But I think for me, someone like me who's addicted very quickly, I was just like, oh yeah, this is all I want now, rather than having like a more of a balance. But I still have, it still has a special place in my heart.
Of course. I done all of those things with a lot of joy. And I mean, to a point, there was a point where I knew that the more I was doing it, the more I would hate the feeling of, what did I do last night? Like, I can't remember, like anxiety and all that stuff. But in those moments, I did have an amazing time. But I also know that some of those things were not always reality as well.
Yeah,
Get caught up in this bubble. But,
totally.
you look back on some of the friendships that you have and some of the experience you had, and they weren't real, because when you take all of that stuff away, some of those people aren't the same people, and you're not the same person, and you don't really
exactly. Totally. Yeah.
in common with every single person. And that's kind of been the most awakened thing, is that I'm not that person, they're not that person, but that's okay. And maybe we can find ourselves and reconnect, or maybe that was the time in our life where they meant to us what they meant to us.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's funny because like going to rehab and starting to like look back on my timeline, and like, oh, that's why I was so desperate for that, because back when I was in high school, I had a really, really gorgeous group of friends in high school, but I still got really bullied, and there was still that whole thing of like not being accepted. So it's funny, like going and doing all the therapy, and you're sort of like, oh, right, I was making up for lost time in my 20s for when I was a teenager, when I wasn't feeling X, Y, and Z, There's so much that I found popped up in my adult life from my childhood and my teenage years, and would like either recreate or, try and do the complete opposite of, just to gain a small win, if you could call it that,
Yeah, exactly right. And those things seemed very important to us back then, because like you said, like for me, like I started going out when I was 21. Before that, I'd never really been out at all before, like at all. I'd never been to a club. For the first time I went to ARC, like 21, never been out before. So I felt like I jumped straight in, because like, wow, I finally feel like I'm myself, and like I can do this. And you feel like you're making up for lost time. But then when you're in it so much, you're like, well, I'm just going to keep this rolling as long as I can roll, guys, and keep moving, honey.
Why would I stop? Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And so for you, did you only go to rehab the one time, or did you go back up? Because you said like the day you came out, you relapsed. Tell me a little bit about how that was for you, and what did you feel after doing that? Like,
oh yeah, it was really I was really angry at myself. I was really angry at myself because rehab offered such clarity, and I'd worked really, really hard. Like I really committed to it, and I remember, and it's funny how it's funny how like God or the universe works when it comes to this sort of stuff. I had moved out of the transition house that I was staying in with my therapeutic community, and I was staying with a friend, and she's a flight attendant, and she was away, so I had the keys to her house. So I had her house to myself for about 4 days before she came back from her trip, and she said, "Stay there, blah, 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 as long as you need." And I got there, and I was like, okay, shit, like, anxiety is quite high after being in this sort of bubble for 6 months, and then you given all of your choices and freedom back. It's actually really overwhelming. And I had one of the girls from the therapeutic community, from the girls' rehab that I'd made friends with, and she was like calling me to see if I wanted to go to a meeting with her. And she was calling, and I was ignoring because I wanted to use. And I was trying to make that happen. And I knew that if I answered her call, she would talk me out of it. Because, you know, in rehab, you learn to be so honest that I would have blurted out, yeah, I'm going to use shit, you know.
Yeah.
So I ignored her call, and I'd set up. I went over to this hotel room and met up with these guys, and you know, used injected methadone, and it just. It was really weird. My relationship had already shifted with using through rehab. Oh no, internet connection. Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry. So I felt really angry at myself. I felt like it sort of like wasn't really happening, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was but I was annoyed. I was pissed off. I was pissed off that I did it.
I can imagine you would be. And like you said, they tell you that this is a possibility when you're given back all these choices.
Yeah.
And, you know, I can imagine how overwhelming that would have felt, especially being locked up, not locked up again, but, you know what I mean, in a bubble for 6 months, all this stuff, and you feel so good. And then you come out and you're like, oh my God, I can do it. But, you know, do I want to? And then your mind is just telling you to do it, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really challenging. Like the thing that I've learned like over the past few years with relapses and is to not be too hard on myself, and to just, you know, if I've had a relapse, I have to look back and be like, okay, where was I at? Where was I at emotionally? What was going on for me? Why did it happen? You know, what was driving that? Like, I've had to look at it that way because the guilt that can sit within me for doing it was so heavy and it didn't really serve me in any way. So I had to sort of change it and be like, okay, if it's happened, it's happened. And I'm not promoting relapse by any means. Everyone has a different way of doing their recovery. But for me, I had to really examine why it continued to happen. And that really helped me gain a better understanding of my using. And it's like I mentioned this earlier, but like I do have a lot of gratitude to that kind of using because it has completely helped me find who I actually am, you know, and continue to do so. Like, you know, it's a work in progress, but I had to go that dark to find that light. And I had to go to that shadow to empty it and to sort of be like, instead of this pain and trauma, me being at the mercy of it, maybe I can now spin this into gold and be able to actually help others rather than it just sitting in me doing nothing but causing more pain. So I do have a lot of thanks to those experiences. Yeah.
Totally. I can imagine that would be definitely something that, like I said, there are no wrong things if you learn something from it, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then kind of like I kind of like listening to your journey of rehab kind of makes me realize that, like, even though, you know, I didn't go to rehab myself for my alcohol addiction, because that was really my massive problem with alcohol, like, because it was there everywhere I could have it. And some days I had it for 2 or 3 or 4 days. I realized I kind of did my own life rehab. Literally, when I decided to stop, I literally made the fucking changes of in all areas of my life, because I was like, I need to deal with this stuff here, and I'm going to fucking go in. And I was like jumping into personal development, business, jumping into my fitness, and really just also spending time with myself sober so that I could actually process what was going on. And I know what it's like to sit there and be like, just look back and go, fuck, that was why I did that. Like, that is why I did that for so long. And again, a lot of those things become an illusion, because you're like, that wasn't the real me. But again, I fought for so long that it was, because it gave me that confidence, it gave me this and that. But in reality, I was never feeling confident outside of drinking. I was never feeling like happy outside of doing it. And it gave me joy, but it also fucking took it away from me at the same time, you know?
Totally. And I actually think that's harder. I think that's like really admirable, because rehab is a is a safe bubble, you know, like you go there and you're told what to do and you're told when to eat and you're told when to sleep and you've got such a strict kind of schedule. But getting clean and sober in the real world, like that's like we would say to each other all the time in rehab, we'd be like, shit, that would be those first 90 days are so delicate and so sensitive and you know, you're really waking up, you know, through that period that I always admire people that do it outside of rehab because, I mean, the temptation is like, you know, it's one phone call away or, you know, the bottle shop's just there or, you know, like
totally.
It's huge. Yeah.
100% because I literally had to change my whole life around to be able to do it because if I kept doing the same things, I would get into the same patterns and the patterns would lead to thoughts and then thoughts would lead to feelings and feelings would lead to actions, right? And so I literally shifted my whole life and started one thing at a time, like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to work on myself. I'm going to work on my health and fitness. I'm going to eat well. I'm going to exercise. I had my dog and I was like, okay, all these things I'm going to throw into. I'm not going to go and hang out with people that I know that can't support me on that journey or couldn't be around without having a drink. So yeah, it was in a sense, I felt like it wasn't so hard because I knew that I'd been ready for so long, but was just holding on to it till like, I don't know, the final straw. And I was like, okay, I just can't do this anymore. Like I've got to start to live my life instead of hiding away from what I really wanted to do and who I really was. And, you know, just unlayering all those things made me more of a better person, a better friend, a better coach. And now I'm finally like, if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I look back on it and say like that year of rehab was actually the thing that got me to where I am today, you know? So
yeah, you do. You hit that point where you're like, I've actually had enough. Like I've taken it for my standards. I'm done. You know, like I really, I really get that feeling of I've pushed it too far.
Yeah.
And now I'm really, but like it's freedom though, isn't it? Like it really truly is freedom from those shackles, like from that kind of one way of thinking too.
100%. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely freedom of those shackles from that because like I said, like I would avoid how I was truly feeling by drinking because I felt like, oh, this is making me happy. This is taking away all my stress. And you really realize that and you actually can heal. Like, for example, I'm the type of person that had built up so many walls that I was never able to be emotional and cry like when I was sober. And, you know, if I had a drink and I was upset, I could let it out. And I felt like, oh, this is allowing me to process things. But really, it was just a heightened sense of whatever was going on. And when you go through the process, and I think it was somewhere in my first 90 days where I just remember being at home and just going, oh my God, I have hurt myself so much by using it. And I fell on the floor in a heap, crying hysterically. I couldn't stop. I couldn't move and stop for like half an hour. And I was like, this is what my body's been needing to do for so long. And that's probably a combination of, you know, 10, 15 years of me not being able to really allow myself to be myself and let out how I really feel, you know?
Yeah. It's funny because I read the Russell Brand recovery book. Have you read that?
No, I haven't, but I've heard about it. Yeah.
It's a really good read, and like he talks about how we're living in a society that really promotes using and in any, you know, addiction in any form. Like it's like have this, do this, buy that, eat that, drink this, you know, the pressure that it kind of he says that it's not really a surprise that people are addicted to anything because this is the world that we're living in at the moment. And I kind of really agree with that. Like I sort of, for me, like looking back on my own recovery journey, I was, you know, all constantly trying to fit in, got to look like this, got to look like that. If I don't look like that, then I'm going to take this so I feel like that. You know what I mean? Don't have that money, I'm going to eat that. Like it was so being told what to do that for me, I guess the using felt like a way of gaining a little bit of control for myself subconsciously, you know. Yeah. Strongly recommend the read. It's a really, really good read.
Okay, I'll definitely check it out on Audible because that's where I read all
Yeah.
this. Yeah. Nice. And so for you coming out of it and going through your process here, have you found that some of the people that you were obviously probably really close to before have been maybe not so supportive or have maybe put you in positions where it's probably led to something happening? Or
Question.
and obviously we can't blame anyone else for our choices, but we can be put in situations and it becomes, easier for us to go down that path, right?
Yeah. Do you know relationships have definitely shifted, that's for sure. And there has been a lot of a lot of difficult situations with my most intimate relationships in my life. Where I think on both ends, we've just been trying to understand how to deal with certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Because, even though there's a handbook for how to do recovery and all of this sort of stuff, it's really hard for family and friends to get their head around certain things as well. Yeah. And so that there's definitely been losses and triumphs on both ends. I've never blamed anyone for I put myself in the situations, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
because by the time I've done the 12-step program and by the time I've done rehab, I'm educated on my behavior. And I don't, I would never want to blame anyone for being like, you put me, you should have known. No. I knew what I was doing. Yeah. I know how manipulative I can be when I want to use, so I know, I know that I have a lot to do with those sort of circumstances. I also, I've lost friendships too. I think doing this sort of, well, I don't want to say lost, but, moved away from certain friendships where doing this sort of work, you do start to realize what your values are. And I couldn't help but look at my life and the people in my world and be like, oh, maybe we've outgrown this now, maybe it is time to move on. And that's okay. We just value different things and we've turned into different people. But the relationship side of addiction is really difficult. It's really, really hard. Because no one really knows what the right thing to do is in times of crisis, and then particularly with family, there's so much love there that there's also so much heartache. So resentments are really easy to flare up. And, I know with my family in particular, they've been really, really supportive and really tried their best to understand why this is happening. But at the same time, they also get impatient, which I totally understand because, it's a tricky roller coaster to ride for everybody. And because this condition is sort of not really they call it a disease, but it's not really seen as a disease by by other people. It's kind of, it's a little, I don't know what the word is, but it almost there's a sense that it could be you know what you're doing and it's your fault kind of thing. Where sometimes
their model of the world, right? And so they go, I would never get like that. So you must have, you know what you're doing, yeah.
Yeah. Where it really is a mental condition, where we fall into these shadow aspects of ourselves. But yeah, relationships have been tested and there's definitely some that have been lost, but there's also
regained friendships,
revived older relationships that have just flourished and become so beautiful and so compassionate and so honest, because the nature of our conversations have just been really real rather than talking shit. It's been a ride. That's been a ride.
Definitely. Yeah, 100% relate to that too.
You find the same?
Yeah, along the journey, like I said, there have been things that, some of my friendships have definitely blossomed there. I've met some new amazing people that have really supported and helped me on the journey without knowing who I was before, other than what I've shared with them.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, there are some people that have gone along the way, and some people that you probably wouldn't have necessarily thought would ever have left your life. But, who knows if it's forever or it's just a path there. And when the other people that are still inside of that bubble that you were in when you were drinking or using or whatever it was, it's hard for them to see you out there without them feeling like you're judging them for what they're doing, when it's never been about me judging someone else. It's been about me trying to sort my life out. And if that makes you happy and you're enjoying yourself, good. But I just can't always be around that energy without me feeling like maybe, I'm going to want to do it. Proximity is power. If me as an alcoholic was hanging around people who were drinking all the time, it's natural that I'm more likely going to want to drink or have a drink because I'm around those people. So having to step away from that, and I can definitely be around it. But if I was around those people all the time, I know it would be too hard for me to say no all the time.
Yeah. I also found that
and it was never their fault, it was always mine. And again, like you said, putting myself in those situations is my responsibility, right?
Yeah, it really is. I found too that the role that I played in certain people's lives, and vice versa, and like who I was to certain people, and the pattern that we had fallen into in our relationships. And it was really, really hard to, one, come to terms with these roles, but two, then try to shift them, because we've been playing these roles in each other's lives for such a long time that it's like, shit, I don't feel that way anymore. And I don't like this role that I'm playing for you. You know what I mean? And I don't like the role you're playing for me. So now I need to sort of figure this out, like either shimmy out of it or shift it, or try to like sort of, I don't know, not participate in those sort of unhealthy.
Setting boundaries probably for the first time in your life, with people, right?
Yeah, for the first time in your life. Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah. The relationship side of addiction has been really eye-opening.
Totally. It's real, right? It's definitely real.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's all this history there, and it's all caught up in that web of addiction as well too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Nice. So let's tell everyone a bit about what got you into what you're doing now, and how that's probably helped you along on your journey that you're on.
Yeah. I think light work and tarot, and I don't know, let's just call it a little bit of like healing magic has always been in me. Yes. I've always had a connection to spirit, even as a child. I would feel things and see things, spirits, I guess you would say. Then, you go into, high school, and, you become cool and smoking in the toilets, you know what I mean? So you're sort of like, yeah, no, I'm not going to pay attention to anything spiritual. I'm busy being a rebel. And then 20s, partying, using, all that sort of stuff. So I'd really, really ignored this part of myself for years and years and years. And then going to rehab and just sort of unlocking certain things within, I was like, oh, that's right. This is really a priority for me. And this is something that's really important. So the past few years have been learning how to read tarot cards and then sort of give back to the community. And it's come really natural, and it's been really, really nice. Like it's felt like it's, I'm expressing that part of myself that's been suppressed for a really long time. What was the question? Sorry.
How you got into it and how it's been helping you on your journey of sobriety as well, because you finally found stuff that you're loving to do, right? It's your
cool. Sorry.
Anyway.
Yeah, but this is coupled up really nicely with the work that I did in rehab, because now I feel like bringing the spirit aspect into my recovery is a bit more of a gentler way of looking after myself. And it's really shown me to be compassionate towards myself, which has been a really, really hard thing to get my head around, to show compassion. I can show compassion to others, but when it comes to showing compassion to myself, I didn't even know how I would do it. So doing the spirit work really, really, really helps me to accept, be compassionate, and see myself more as an equal rather than a less than, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. And I can relate to that whole part of trying to find compassion to yourself because, you know, you've throughout this whole journey and when people are, you know, effed up or drunk, you know, people do things and it's, you know, sometimes they're really fucked up things that happen to you in like friendship stuff. But you let it go or you move on because you're like compassion, they weren't wasted. That's not who they are. But then when you do something when you're like that, you fucking torture yourself for I don't know how long because you're like, fuck, I'm a terrible person. How could I do that to them? Like, that's not the real me. Like, why am I doing this? And then that also makes you go, oh God, I just can't deal with this. Glug, 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 or whatever, because you want to avoid that situation. But yeah, that finding compassion for yourself throughout this journey is definitely probably the biggest gift you can probably give yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. The relationship, that's what I realized, that like this wasn't really about the drugs and alcohol. It was completely about the relationship that I had with myself. And it was so warped and so unhealthy. And, you know, it still spikes up to this day. Like it's still, I can still really easily go into those headspaces and still be really judgy. And, you know, it does take daily practice, like, you know, prayer, meditation, journaling, whatever it is, to just really keep that connection true to self. Otherwise, I can go off the rails really easily and get triggered very, very easily if I'm not doing daily practice. For sure.
Yeah, daily rituals or morning routines or whatever you want to call about them. And you said meditation, prayer, journaling, you know, whatever works for you, it definitely is important because it keeps you in the right mindset. And, you know, if you start your day in the right way, you're way more likely to be able to keep yourself sober that day. And I know that for myself, especially in those first days, I would write down every day, I will be sober today. I will be sober today. And it was almost like I had to start trusting myself for the first time again because
trusting yourself. Yeah.
And I used to say to them, like, I'm not drinking today. And I always, when I would say it that way, I don't know, it just led to me feeling like I wanted to drink. So I had to reframe into, I will be sober today. Like, what do I want instead of what do I don't want, you know? And it really helped me do that every day because I then build up trust in myself. And I was like, wow, I finally trust myself. And I never trusted myself before because I would say all these things, but just fail at the first hurdle because, you know, it was a pattern, you know?
It's a pattern. Yeah. It was easy too. It was comfortable. It's easy. Like, I think like it was, you know, when we're using and drinking and stuff, like we're comfortable in that spot. Like it's something we're familiar with. We know how to do it. So when you start to get clean, you're like, oh shit, what's my crutch? How do I move through social situations without being trashed? Or, you know, like it's very challenging.
So challenging. But, you know, like at the end of the day, we're coming out the other side. And like I said, we're never perfect. So we are going to make mistakes and things are going to happen. But, you know, it's all about getting back up and starting fresh the next day, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about now, where are you going for the next 6 months? I know obviously you're in lockdown at the moment. Has that affected how you're feeling, or have you had to put in extra work to continue to focus on your sobriety?
Oh, yes. The triggers are real through lockdown. You're sort of given, well, I've been given this time. So it's very easy to be like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now, you know, while responsibilities are light. So it's definitely had its challenge.
Oh, I think we lost you there for a minute.
It's like I was talking to a girlfriend and I'm like, 1 week with this lockdown is really gloomy. I'm eating heaps of sugar and I'm just like not doing anything. And then the next week I'm really like cha, you know, like really on top of it. And then the next week, so it seems to be going like that at the moment. But But one thing that I've taken away from merging the spirit work with recovery is self-awareness and observation. I've found that if I observe certain feelings rather than get taken or I find myself at the mercy of them, it's much easier to move through those obsessive moments rather than getting taken away and having the head attacks kind of thing. So I really try really, really hard to stay aware and observe how I feel when I'm in those spaces.
Yeah.
But in terms of the next 6 months, I'm really trying to, I'm working on a fantasy novel at the moment, which I'm really, really loving. So that's sort of been my creative outlet. So I'm really hoping to finish the first draft of that because it's taken a really, really long time. I'm sort of halfway through and I just want to get to the first draft and then start editing. So
yeah,
working on that. I'm lucky enough to still have my day job through this time. So that's been really, really good. And finishing my my course, my lightworking course, the medicine wheel, and starting my own little, side hustle or in enhancing what I'm already doing with the tarot reading.
Yeah.
And then adding that as another service that I could offer. But trying to stay balanced is a real priority for me. Living a really balanced life.
Nice. And I agree. Living as much as you can be in balance is definitely going to be the way that you're going to stay on the right path. But pendulum swings, so it's just about really being aware that when they are swinging, how do I get myself back to more of the middle ground, right?
Yeah, totally. Because I think, it's when things are going fine and you're coasting, that, of course, that's kind of easy. Like, that's fine. But, when the tests come, when that pendulum does swing, that's when you've got to put the wisdom into practice, that, the stuff that you've learned and all of that knowledge, and from the 12-step program to, the spiritual stuff. It's like, okay, now I'm being tested. Now I've really got to figure this out and problem solve without it leading to disaster again.
Totally. I agree there for sure. So from your kind of journey throughout all of this, if there was one piece of advice you could share to anyone listening here today, what do you think would be what it is you would share?
Don't be too hard on yourself.
Don't be too hard on yourself.
Not be too hard on yourself. If you're using and if that's what's going on for you at the moment, just be gentle with yourself because it takes a lot of courage to get clean. It really does. And it's not easy, but just grant yourself the time and space to figure it out. Yeah.
I love that, because the more you're hard on yourself, the more you get caught up in the fact that I want to avoid these feelings, and you go back into that pattern. Yeah. So if you take it easy, have some compassion for yourself, you'll start to realize what's the right things that you really need to do to sort it out if you feel like it's a big problem.
That hardness, I feel, for me, just really promoted guilt and shame even more so. And so they just don't serve us in any way. They do in a small way, that it's an indicator that something needs to change. But we don't want to sit in guilt and shame too heavily. It's just, you've got to be gentle with yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on here, Danny. I've loved what we've shared today and how vulnerable and open you've been. Where can people find you if they wanted to reach out and chat about what you do or anything else there?
Yeah, cool. I have on Instagram, House of Lemonade, HAUS_of_lemonade. That's my tarot jam. So yeah, on Instagram.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming here, Danny. It's been a pleasure having you on here. And thank you guys for listening. It's been an amazing episode here today. So if you have any comments or any feedback, feel free to leave it below in whatever platform you're listening on, or you can find me also on Instagram and Facebook, just at Cristiano Green. So thank you guys and have a wonderful day. And we'll be back next week with another episode.